Is Robert Pattinson the best actor to play the Caped Crusader in live action? Does Kevin Conroy still reign supreme when it comes to Batman voice actors? And where does Adam West's droll straight man figure into it all? These are the movie versions of Batman ranked worst to best. The thing you really have to understand about the original Batman serials is that they're bad. Not just bad in retrospect after 70 years of advancements in filmmaking and special effects, although they certainly fit that bill pretty handily. No, they're just bad. The first serial, released by Columbia in 15 parts, amounts to 4.5 hours of the worst version of Batman to ever hit the silver screen. Batman and Robin, played by Lewis Wilson and Douglas Croft, are recast as government agents who joined up to help the war effort and are tasked with stopping the villainous Dr. Daka from building a death ray. In theory, that's a pretty exciting plot. Unfortunately, the actual execution is atrocious. It somehow winds up being repetitive even by the standards of serials, with alarmingly bad special effects, hilariously awkward costumes, unconvincing fights, and of course, a massive helping of racism to bring it all together. Overall, this is a Batman best forgotten. The best thing you can say about 1949's Batman and Robin is that it's not as racist as its predecessor. Unfortunately, that's about all you can say. Robert Lowery's Batman stumbles from one goofy cliffhanger to the next in an attempt to unmask a mad scientist called the Wizard. 4 hours later, it turns out to be exactly who you thought he was. We'll take hilariously silly over upsettingly racist any day of the week, but the fact remains that Lowery's bumbling, barely present Batman is trapped in a pretty awful plot that stretches out even longer than the first serial. The worst part, though, is the costume, a straight-up sweatsuit capped off with an ill-fitting cowl. Every now and then, an idea comes along that seems like an absolute no-brainer. Such is the case with the casting of Peter Weller as the older Batman drawn out of retirement in the animated adaptation of Frank Miller's groundbreaking Dark Knight Returns. It sounds so good on paper, right? An older, more brutal, and even angrier Batman played by the guy who brought his voice to the title role of RoboCop? It's such a perfect idea that it's hard to argue that they should have done anything else. Unfortunately, the idea is the only part that's perfect. Whether it's Weller's unfamiliarity with the art of voice acting or the desired effect from director Jay Olivia, Weller sounds in every scene like he just woke up. He might actually be the worst part of the film. Rather than a dynamic growl that goes with the action, Weller winds up just being boring, and whatever problems you might have with The Dark Knight Returns, boring should not be one of them.
You're slow!
True, but we're all slow when we're thigh-deep in mud.
Bruce Greenwood can best be described as the 2003 Toyota Corolla of Batman actors. Nothing fancy, no real features to speak of, and it doesn't quite have the appeal of the older classic models or newer, better ones, but it'll get you where you're going. Okay, so maybe that's a harsh way of putting it, but it's pretty accurate. Greenwood has played Batman on multiple occasions, 3 DTV movies, a video game, and the Young Justice TV show, and it's probably telling that there's only one of those, the adaptation of Gotham by Gaslight, where he's the focus. Even then, the emphasis is less on Batman as a character than it is on the idea of seeing all the familiar characters recast in the Victorian era setting of a story in which Batman fights Jack the Ripper. The others are all focused on different characters, and in the case of Under the Red Hood, Greenwood is playing Batman opposite Supernatural star Jensen Ackles, whose performance as Jason Todd is so full of charisma that he quickly upstages his co-star.
You don't understand. I don't think you've ever understood.
What? What, your moral code just won't allow for that?
Since actor Jensen Ackles did such a bang-up job as Jason Todd in 2010's animated adaptation of Under the Red Hood, he got his chance as the Caped Crusader himself in a pair of Long Halloween adaptations in 2021. Unfortunately, Ackles showed his talents weren't quite the fit for Batman that many had anticipated. Ackles delivers a stock standard Wayne and slightly gruffier Dark Knight.
Attacking us like that, out in the open, it didn't fit the profile.
Troy Baker, ironically enough, becomes a hero of this adaptation by giving an excellent Hamill impersonation as the Joker. David Dastmalchian likewise offers up a genuinely chilling performance here as Calendar Man. This arc features most of Batman's rogues gallery appearing in one way or another, each character playing their own small role. If you're a Batman fan, it's a must-watch. Just don't expect Ackles' work here to give you any new insight into the character. On paper, Ben Affleck seems like a pretty solid choice for Batman. He's got those square-jawed good looks, and he's more than capable of bringing a deep focus and intensity to roles when they call for it. In practice, though, the Batman of Dawn of Justice is only saved from being the worst superhero in his universe because Superman is somehow even worse. It's worth noting that much of director Zack Snyder's inspiration came from Frank Miller's landmark story The Dark Knight Returns. Unfortunately, while the movie recreated entire scenes wholesale from the comics, they're all divorced from their original context. Affleck's Batman is a ludicrously violent murderer who's easily manipulated into a fistfight with another superhero. A fistfight that ends when the person he's fighting reminds him that other people also have moms. You'd think that would be something he would have learned in his years as the world's greatest detective.
What does that mean? Why did you say that name?
The animated adaptation of Frank Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One fares a little better than The Dark Knight Returns for a few reasons, but the casting of its title character was not one of them. Ben McKenzie approaches the role of a young Bruce Wayne, trying to figure out how to best fight crime with what can only be described as the monotone delivery of a sexy robot. Seriously, we've tried to think of other ways to describe it, but that is unquestionably the best one.
You've eaten well. You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit. But your feast is nearly over.
All of the intensity and emotion of key scenes from the original, like being inspired by the Bat crashing through his window or announcing his presence to Gotham's wealthy white-collar criminals, is lost in favor of the sensual monotony of some kind of pleasure droid. Once you have that image in your head, it does make McKenzie's Batman a little more interesting, but it doesn't rescue the performance. Instead, ironically enough, Batman winds up being overshadowed by another Year One main character, Jim Gordon, who's played here by Bryan Cranston in a role that McKenzie would get a few years later as the star of Gotham.
It's been years since I had to take out a Green Beret. Even so, he deserves a handicap.
Crisis on Two Earths was one of the earlier entries into the ever-expanding roster of DC Universe animated original movies, and generally speaking, it's also one of the best. It was loosely based on some classic JLA stories, giving it a solid foundation. It was written by the late Dwayne McDuffie, who was the story editor for Justice League Unlimited. It even has some great fight scenes and solid visuals that are a step above what viewers would get later. In fact, pretty much everything about the movie is great, except Batman. It was a weird bit of stunt casting to get William Baldwin to play the Dark Knight, but he's not really bad in the part. He just never really sounds like Batman, in a way that's difficult to pin down.
What was so valuable that the crime syndicate would cross dimensions to get it?
Did you keep it from her?
Her henchmen escaped with it, whatever it was.
Maybe it's just that this feels like a lost episode of Justice League, which makes it a little weird that it's not Kevin Conroy's voice coming out of Batman. Maybe it's that this appears to be Baldwin's very first voice acting gig, giving him some intangible quality that sounds a little off. Whatever it is, it's just not quite right. 2021's Soul of the Dragon is another modern DC animated outing that recasts The Dark Knight, and it has a lot of good things going for it, even if the least impressive of them is its take on Batman. Grim actor David Giuntoli gives a dry performance as Bruce Wayne. His Batman doesn't fare much less grim in the rare instances he dons the cape at all. The movie focuses as much on Mark Dacascos doing his best Bruce Lee impression as Richard Dragon, as it does on Bruce Wayne.
We're in this together, Bruce. Just like we've always been. Like we're supposed to be. We are the Dragon.
This original Batman story was written by animated series veteran Bruce Timm. Set in the 1970s, Soul of the Dragon is an R-rated-like take on martial arts films, inspired largely by the Bruce Lee classic Enter the Dragon. Of course, it takes cues from the martial arts-heavy Batman Begins as well. Overall, though, Soul of the Dragon is a pretty good animated homage, if not necessarily a great Batman movie. The best way to describe Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. actor Jason O'Mara's take on Batman is this. What would it sound like if George Clooney had been allowed to be Batman in a much less campy setting? O'Mara's tone of voice is remarkably similar to how Clooney sounded behind the cowl, even if he isn't allowed to embrace his charisma as fully as Clooney could. The story of Hush is a strong one, as Batman must uncover the identity of a mysterious new killer in Gotham. However, O'Mara delivers a confident, only slightly brooding take on the detective.
The events of the past months reach as high as Superman and as low as the Joker. All were set into motion by Hush.
O'Mara would come back for 2020's solid Justice League Dark Apokolips War, where he reprised his role alongside a star-studded cast in a very different, very violent sort of superhero story. But unfortunately, O'Mara's second shot at the character wasn't enough to put him any higher on this list. First things first, Diedrich Bader is actually a really good Batman. In Batman the Brave and the Bold, he served as a cheerless Batman. His take was as a straight man for a cast of superheroic oddballs in a series of team-ups that spanned the entirety of the DC universe. Even the viewers who were initially put off by the show's inherent silliness were won over when the show veered into darkness with Chill of the Night.
So just like that, he signed away their lives. So casually, without remorse, without blinking a filthy eye.
Here's the problem. There's no Brave and the Bold movie to show up Bader's chops, although he does get second billing in a straight-to-video Scooby-Doo movie. That just leaves JLA adventures trapped in time. The story revolves around the Justice League having to go back in time to save baby Superman from being murdered by the Legion of Doom. At one point, it involves them literally throwing the indestructible Kryptonian baby around like a football. Overall, though, it's pretty forgettable outside of some truly bad costume designs, and none of the things that made Bader's Batman work are on display. In the run-up to the release of 2019's Joker, there was a lot of commentary about how writer-director Todd Phillips had said that his take on the title character with Joaquin Phoenix didn't follow anything from the comic books. With that being the case, it was probably pretty embarrassing for him to realize that he accidentally put both the Joker and Bruce Wayne, who was actually the comic book superhero Batman, into the film. Sure, technically the little boy Bruce Wayne doesn't suit up as a dark Avenger of the Night to perform any of the ninja tricks Batman is known for, but we're still counting him for this list. In fact, Dante Pereira-Olson gives us an interesting baseline for Bat performances. He definitely doesn't do anything wrong in his portrayal of Lil Batman, but that's mostly because he doesn't really do anything, period. His most memorable moment in the film comes in a scene during which Bruce stands there silently while a grown man puts his fingers into Bruce's mouth and makes him smile. Pereira-Olson is perfectly fine for what he's been given to do, which is nothing, and the end result is that this is the Bat performance equivalent of pure water, a completely value-neutral baseline that we can use as our midpoint. In virtually any other film, casting Jimmy Kimmel as Batman would be downright alarming for fans, provoking the kind of discourse that would make Ben Affleck getting the part look like a brief but civil debate. In Teen Titans Go to the Movies, however, it's not even in the top 5 most notable casting choices. The big one is almost certainly Nicolas Cage's all-too-brief performance as Superman, both because Cage was initially set to play the Man of Steel in Tim Burton's Superman Lives, and because it's Nicolas Cage as Superman.
I knew you were goofsters, but using Lois and now this? It's too much!
Compared to that, Kimmel as Batman doesn't seem all that notable, or, to be honest, all that memorable. Despite Batman being at the center of one of the film's most notable moments, Kimmel is ultimately very forgettable as Batman. It's that rare case of a movie that just has too much going on. In a movie that's soaked in lime green neon and hot pink leopard print, Val Kilmer's portrayal of the Caped Crusader is, well, the kindest way to put it would be reserved, but let's not mince words here. Kilmer, only 2 years removed from a charismatic scene-stealing turn as Doc Holliday in Tombstone, drifts through Batman Forever with the screen presence of a cardboard cutout.
What's wrong?
To be fair, there was a good reason for him to make that choice as an actor. Director Joel Schumacher, Tim Burton's hand-picked successor, was clearly drawing his inspiration from the 1966 television show, and with Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones chewing their way through every available bit of scenery, replicating Adam West's straight man so they'd have something to bounce off of probably seemed like the best way to go. There are parts where it actually works, too. The best scenes by far in Batman Forever are the ones in which Carrey's Edward Nygma tries to dress, act, and sound like his idol, Kilmer's Bruce Wayne. For those, he's the perfect straight man for the wildly over-the-top villains. When it comes to actually being Batman, however, Kilmer's Adam West impression just doesn't land. Whether it's battling against the villains, giving Dick Grayson a home, or having a monumentally tepid romance with Nicole Kidman's Dr. Chase Meridian, it just flat out doesn't work. If you're not familiar with Batman Unlimited, that's probably because it's the reverse of the way things usually work. Rather than starting out with a movie or cartoon and then creating toys based on that, this one started out as an action figure line that was created to keep kid-friendly Batman toys in stores during the more PG-13 era of the Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder films. Once the toys were out, a series of animated shorts and a trio of direct-to-video movies were released, and if you're into the weirder side of Batman, they're well worth watching. You might expect a movie that only exists to support an action figure line to feature a series of incredibly toyetic costumes, but the Unlimited movies go a step further by giving Batman a new sidekick in the form of a robot wolf that turns into a motorcycle. They're not exactly what you'd call good, but they are awesome.
I am shooting a viral video here!
Batman is brought to life this time courtesy of veteran voice actor Roger Craig Smith. It might seem counterintuitive to cast the same guy who played Sonic the Hedgehog and Thomas from Regular Show as Batman, but he turns in a solid performance. He definitely shows why he was brought back to play the Caped Crusader in other projects, like the English dub of Batman Ninja and most recently 2020's Superman Red Sun. To say Batman and Robin has a bad reputation is putting it about as mildly as you possibly could. Whether or not it deserves all the hate, it's commonly regarded as one of the worst superhero movies of all time, with a bloated cast of villains and sidekicks sprawling out into a plot that starts off silly and ends up verging on ludicrous.
I hate to disappoint you, but rubber lips are immune to your charms.
It's so bad that both Joel Schumacher and George Clooney have apologized for it, and it was credited with nearly killing the franchise until it returned with a darker direction under Christopher Nolan. The thing is, as controversial as it might sound, Clooney's not actually that bad in the role of Bruce Wayne. Like Affleck, he's an actor who was perfect for the role on paper, a leading man on the rise who brought an effortless charm to the role. The problem is that effortless charm doesn't really work for Batman, but it ends up working pretty well for Bruce Wayne. Clooney's best work comes when he's out of the costume, sweeping around Wayne Manor dealing with Alfred's not quite fatal illness, or in the few scenes where we see him as the franchise's most convincing version of a celebrity playboy to date. Of all the actors to play Batman, Troy Baker might be the most versatile. He's the only actor to voice both Batman and the Joker. In Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, he plays them both in the same film, and he's even been 3 different versions of Robin in other movies. He has range. He even has range within the same character. The version of Batman that he plays in the kid-targeted Lego movies is a slightly different character than we get from the more serious version in Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're both recognizably Baker, who manages to carve out a performance that's a little more distinct from other voice actors. The only real downside is that he often comes off as a substitute for other actors. His Joker, for instance, is very much filling in for Mark Hamill, and his Batman could be seen as a replacement for Kevin Conroy. Still, Baker's Batman is incredibly solid. He captures the threatening growl of the Dark Knight while still having enough energy and character to keep it from slipping into monotone. It's arguable that his performance is what makes Batman vs. TMNT work far better than it had any right to. Rino Romano's tenure on the animated show The Batman, despite lasting a respectable 5 seasons, will always exist in the shadow of its predecessor, Batman the Animated Series, and will never be as fondly remembered. That's a shame, too. He might not be as definitive as Kevin Conroy, but Romano is actually very good in the part. As a younger Batman, Romano's got a little more lightness and energy to his performance, but still keeps a gravelly menace that comes along with the cape and cowl. Romano's one full-length adventure, the spooky made-for-TV The Batman vs. Dracula, is an enjoyable movie in its own right, and even works as a showcase for the redesigned Penguin and Joker. Still, for the epic confrontation between the Bat-themed good guy and a vampire bad guy, it's not quite as good as you want it to be, especially since that story's been told with more panache elsewhere. That's Romano's role in a nutshell. If we didn't have anything to compare it to and could judge it entirely on its own merits, he'd be great. Director Matt Reeves took a big chance in casting an actor many viewers mainly know as a Twilight vampire, Robert Pattinson. But as the months of production went by, the concept of Pattinson's Batman won over fans. Pattinson's Bruce Wayne is not only younger looking than fans have come to expect from the character, but he's also decidedly more awkward around people. In case the Nirvana needle drops didn't get the point across, this man is filled with angst, regret, and a healthy dose of self-loathing. He clings to his virtuous vigilante mission as Batman, referring to himself as a nocturnal animal, determined to clean up the streets. In a film heavily influenced by 70s cinema, will he soar like Brewster McCloud or go off the deep end like Travis Bickle? As Batman, Pattinson's jaw is the best since Kilmer, but his quirky decisions and physicality feel more like Michael Keaton, without the Tim Burton polish. This is a world's greatest detective who makes mistakes, gets teased over the declaration, "I'm vengeance," and punctuates a daring escape by deploying his parachute too quickly and slamming into the pavement. He's flawed, and that's interesting. There's a moment in Batman Begins that really captures the intensity Christian Bale brings to his performance as Batman.
Where were the other drugs going?
I never knew. I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
Bale's Batman brings that intensity to everything he does, showing an emotional range that stretches from the righteous fury of Batman to the aimless pain of the orphaned Bruce Wayne. It's a power that's only ever matched when he goes up against Heath Ledger's Joker, one of the best performances in the genre. The detective part of the package might be a little lacking, but the way Bale plays off his co-stars and paints a picture of a man torn between using his rage to fuel his mission and letting it consume him is genuinely incredible. The fact that he does it all while speaking in a voice that sounds like he's chewing rusty nails, that's just icing on the cake. Unlike every other actor on this list, Will Friedle doesn't play Bruce Wayne. He plays Terry McGinnis, a teenager from a cyberpunk future who takes over the role in Batman Beyond. Along with a killer costume design and the best version of a retired Bruce Wayne, Friedle's performance is one of the biggest reasons why Batman Beyond works. The way that he switches from Terry's normal, lighter speaking voice to the growly Batman voice that he uses is distinct without ever feeling like he's going too far over the top with it. He's also an extremely likable character in a way that Bruce's Batman never really is. Terry seems more like a human being and less like the peak ideal of human perfection who is also very grumpy about it. The only thing that's holding him back is that his only film appearance comes in Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, which has a very different tone from the Batman Beyond TV series. It's one of the darkest things that DC has ever done with their animated properties, to the point where some pretty graphic scenes were heavily edited for its first release. That said, it's still a well-done and extremely engaging movie. It's just not a good showcase of what makes Friedle and Terry so good in their roles. The Tim Burton Batman movies have an incredible visual style, with a Gotham City that's hellish urban sprawl come to life, full of buildings with exposed ductwork and piping stacked up next to Art Deco sculptures. They're also full of great bits of satire, beautiful shots, and amazingly offbeat casts. Whether they're good Batman movies is a point of debate, and no one really captures that disconnect more than Michael Keaton. He's actually kind of perfect for the kind of remote, mysterious weirdo who sleeps upside down because he wants to be more like a bat.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on! Let's get nuts.
But there's a disconnect between the stylized goofiness that Burton explored in his earlier films and the 80s action movie aesthetic that saw Keaton's Batman throwing people off buildings and blowing up factories with bombs. It's not really portrayed as heroism, but as a personal quest for vengeance that only incidentally winds up saving the city. Keaton does well in the role, but his Batman is missing some key components other versions of the character nail. An ultra-competent, self-absorbed superhero who writes heavy metal songs about being a sad orphan and is seemingly able to appear at will as soon as no one's looking? The Lego version of Batman is one of those rare finds, a parody of something that actually works pretty well as the thing itself.
Batman is very wise. I also have huge pecs and a 9-pack. Yeah, I've got an extra ab.
Will Arnett's Batman only builds things out of black bricks, and Arnett ramps up his naturally gravelly voice in a spoof of Christian Bale's. At the same time, though, he's very rarely presented as anything other than extremely good at what he does, and he really does act heroically, even if his heroism occasionally means that Han Solo gets eaten by a space worm. Either way, it works. While other portrayals might move away from the inherent silliness of the character, embracing it gives the Lego version a flavor that helps him rival even the best of his big-screen contemporaries. The best thing about Adam West's performance as Batman is that it can mean completely different things depending on when you watch it. As a child, it's easy to buy West's spandex-clad squareness as completely genuine. As an adult, you get the joke. The fact that he was able to play the perfect straight man for a wild cast of villains is every bit as astonishing as those surface-level comic book thrills. The 1966 movie, released between the first 2 seasons of the Batman TV series, has everything, in a very literal sense. The arch-villains are 4 of his greatest foes brought together as a united underworld, complete with a sequence in which Batman and Robin identify their enemies through truly profound leaps of logic.
But wait! It happened at sea. See? C for Catwoman!
It also features West using the role of Bruce Wayne as an attempt to draw his enemies out into the open, miraculously turning his carefully modulated tone into barely controlled rage at the threat of his love interest, Miss Kitka. And the heartbreak in his eyes when he discovers that she was Catwoman all along, it's a surprisingly powerful moment. No actor has ever been as strongly identified with the role of Batman as Adam West, and the movie shows exactly why. His performance walks the delicate balance between full-hearted adventure and witty satire that the material does, and the end result is perfect. Yes, this one is a bit of a cheat. Kevin Conroy has, after all, been the most prominent Batman actor for over 25 years, making his debut on Batman the Animated Series and staying in the role in many of the DC animated movies and the Arkham video games. But there's a good reason. Conroy is an amazing Batman, and everything that makes him great is on display in Mask of the Phantasm. One of the great things about the animated series was that it gave us a version of Batman that was already fully formed, saving the origin stories for a handful of villains like Two-Face and the Riddler. For the film, though, the origin story is a crucial component, and Conroy's performance sells it beautifully. The scene when he's standing in front of his parents' graves, pleading with them to understand he may give up being Batman because he's finally found happiness, might sound ridiculous, but in practice, it's devastatingly emotional.
I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
When that happiness is taken away and Batman gives himself over to his mission entirely, it's fantastic. For a generation of Batman fans, Conroy's is the voice they hear in their heads when they read the comics, and that alone should show just how great he was. It takes an incredible amount of talent to redefine the character, but Conroy did it. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies and TV shows are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.